The beacon was already fading when I locked onto it. I had maybe 4 minutes before it died completely, and I was running on 2 hours of sleep, a cold cup of coffee, and the kind of desperation that makes a man fly toward unknown signals instead of away from them. My ship, the Mule, was not built for speed. She was built for hauling salvage across the outer expanse, and she looked exactly like what she was, a battered, rust-colored freighter with a cracked forward viewport, and an engine that coughed every time I pushed her past 60% thrust. I pushed her to 75 and held on. The signal was coming from a dead moon. No atmosphere, no light, no orbital traffic. Nothing out here but rock and ice and the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I had been working this sector for 3 weeks, chasing ghost readings and burned-out relay stations, and I had found exactly nothing worth money. My debt to a conclave creditor named Vorath was 62,000 galactic credits, and Vorath had stopped being patient about 2 weeks ago. His last message had been 11 words. Pay what you owe, or I collect something else instead. I did not want to find out what something else meant. So when the beacon lit up on my scanner, I did not slow down and think carefully about the risks, which any sensible person would have done. I aimed the nose of the Mule straight at that moon and burned everything I had. The wreck was in a crater the size of a small city. I saw it on approach and immediately understood that whatever I was looking at, it was not anything in my catalog. The ship, if you could call it that, was crescent-shaped, maybe 40 meters from tip to tip, and it was made of something that caught my landing lights and threw them back in colors I did not have names for. Not silver, not white. Something in between, something that moved even though the ship was completely still. The hull had no visible seams, no panels, no bolts or rivets. It looked like it had been grown rather than built, like someone had reached into a star and pulled out a handful of material and shaped it with their hands. I set the Mule down 200 meters out and suited up. The walk across the crater floor took 8 minutes. I counted them because counting helped me stay calm, and I needed to stay calm because my hands were shaking inside my gloves. Not from cold, though it was cold enough out there to freeze a man in 40 seconds without a suit. From excitement. From the sick, electric feeling of looking at something no human being had ever stood this close to. The ship had hit the moon at an angle. One tip of the crescent was buried deep in the rock. The other curved up toward the stars. There was no smoke, no fire, no sign of a recent explosion, which meant either the crash had happened a long time ago, or this ship used drive systems that did not produce heat or combustion. I was betting on the second one. Nothing about this vessel looked like it had been designed by anyone who thought about things the way humans did. I found the entry point by accident. I was working my way around the hull, looking for a hatch or a panel or anything that might open, and I put my hand against the surface to steady myself, and the surface moved, not dramatically. A section of hull, maybe a meter wide, shifted inward by half a centimeter under my palm. I stepped back and stared at it. Then I pressed again, harder, in the same spot. The hull opened. Not like a door, not on hinges or tracks or any mechanical system I could understand. It folded back on itself like water parting, and behind it was a corridor lit in faint blue light. The light had no visible source. It was just there, coming from the walls, steady and calm and about as welcoming as anything I had ever seen inside a wrecked ship, which is to say, not very welcoming at all. I went in anyway. The corridor was narrow and curved, following the crescent shape of the outer hull. The floor felt slightly soft under my boots, which was unsettling. Walls, floor, ceiling, all the same seamless material, all glowing that faint blue. No consoles, no controls, no chairs, no straps, no safety systems of any kind that I could see. Whoever built this either did not worry about crashes, or they had very different bodies than I did. The corridor opened into a central chamber, and that was where I found her. The chamber was larger than it had any right to be, given the size of the ship from outside. That bothered me for a moment before I filed it away to think about later. In the center of the chamber, raised on a platform that seemed to grow directly out of the floor, was a stasis pod, long oval, made of the same material as everything else, with a panel of faint symbols running down one side, and inside, visible through the transparent cover, was a figure. I stood at the edge of the platform and looked at her for a long time. She was tall. I could tell even lying down. Her skin was the color of deep water, a dark blue-gray, and it moved. Not her skin moving, but light in her skin, slow pulses of bioluminescence, cycling through blues and greens from her collarbone to the tips of her four-fingered hands, which were folded over her chest like she was sleeping. Her face was narrow with high cheekbones, and her eyes were closed, and her ears were long and slightly pointed, and her hair, if you could call it hair, was silver and spread around her head like a halo. She was In an entirely unexpected and somewhat inconvenient way, one of the most striking people I had ever seen in my life. I shook that thought off immediately and looked at the pod panel. The symbols meant nothing to me. I had a basic language chip for the 5 most common conclave trade languages, and none of them matched what I was looking at. I touched the panel and nothing happened. I pressed the symbols in different combinations and nothing happened. I stepped back and looked at the pod more carefully, and noticed that the bioluminescence in her skin was very faint. Slower than it should have been. Maybe. I had no idea what normal looked like for this species, but something about the rhythm felt wrong. Too slow. Too dim. Then the panel went dark. All the symbols went out at once, and a sound came from the pod that I felt in my chest before I heard it. A low, resonant hum that dropped in pitch over 3 seconds and then stopped. The transparent cover began to fog. The light in her skin flickered and went still. I did not think. That is the honest truth of what happened next. I did not assess the situation or weigh the risks or consider the legal implications of interfering with alien technology on an unregistered salvage survey. I just moved. I got my hands under the edge of the cover and pulled. It did not move. I pulled harder, and then I found the seam along one side, and I worked my fingers into it, and I pulled with everything I had, and the cover came free with a sound like cracking ice and fell to the chamber floor. She was not breathing. I checked for a pulse the way I had been trained, pressing 2 fingers against the side of her neck, and there was nothing. Her skin felt cool. Not cold, not dead cold, just cool, the way a person feels when they have been lying still for a long time. I did not know her biology. I did not know if what worked on a human chest would work on whatever she was. I did not know if I would break something inside her that could not be fixed. I knew exactly none of the things a person is supposed to know before attempting to restart a heart. I did it. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The way they taught me in field training in a desert a very long way from this dead moon. I focused on the count because if I thought too hard about what I was doing, which was pressing on the chest of an alien person, whose anatomy I knew nothing about in a crashed ship I had found by accident because I needed money, I might stop, and stopping was not an option. She gasped on the 14th breath cycle, not a small gasp, a huge full-body convulsion, like someone had grabbed her by the shoulders and shaken her. And her eyes opened, and they were the color of storm clouds with faint rings of gold around the pupils, and they focused on me with an expression I did not need a translator chip to read. Pure, uncomplicated terror. She pushed herself back against the far end of the pod, which was not very far, and she made a sound that was somewhere between a word and a scream, and she held both hands up between us, and the bioluminescence in her skin went from almost nothing to blinding in about half a second, filling the chamber with cold blue-white light that made me throw my arm over my eyes. I sat back on my heels and held my hands up too. I said the only thing that made sense to say. I said, "Easy, easy, I am not going to hurt you. You were not breathing, I was helping." She stared at me. The light in her skin began to slow, cycling down from blinding to merely bright, and she kept both hands raised between us, and she said something in a language that sounded like water running over stones. Flowing and musical, and completely impossible for my translation chip, which gave me nothing but a soft chime indicating no match found. "I do not speak your language," I said slowly. "My name is Mac. I found your ship. I am a salvager. You were in a pod and the pod stopped working and you stopped breathing, so I performed emergency resuscitation." She did not understand any of that, but she watched my face while I said it, and the hands came down a few centimeters. The light in her skin settled into a slow, steady pulse of deep blue, which I was going to guess meant something calmer than what came before. She said something else, shorter this time. 1 word, maybe 2. And then she looked around the chamber, and her expression changed from terrified to something worse. Something I had seen on people before, in field hospitals and disaster sites. That expression that happens when a person realizes how much they have lost. She reached out slowly and touched the edge of the pod, the cracked, open pod, and she said something very quietly, and this time my translation chip gave me one partial match, a single word pulled from a conclave root language that predated most of the common tongues by thousands of years. The word was, alone. I sat there in the blue light of a crashed alien ship on a dead moon and looked at her, and I thought, I know how that feels. "Come on," I said, standing up slowly, keeping my movements deliberate and careful. "My ship is outside. It is warm in there, or warm enough anyway." She did not understand the words, but she watched me stand, watched me offer a hand, and after a long moment that felt like it lasted several times longer than it actually did, she reached out and took it. Her hand was cool and her grip was firm, and as I helped her to her feet, the light in her skin cycled through 3 colors I had never seen before. and I had absolutely no idea what any of them meant. I walked her back through the corridor and out onto the surface of the dead moon, and she stopped at the threshold and looked up at the stars. She stood there for 30 seconds exactly, not moving, just looking. Then she looked at me, and then she looked at the mule, sitting 200 meters away with her running lights, blinking amber in the dark. I could see her deciding whether to trust me. I was glad she could not see me deciding whether I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. She walked with me to the ship. I helped her up the ramp and got the airlock sealed, and when the pressurization light went green, I pulled off my helmet, and she watched me do it, and then she looked at the small, cluttered, slightly smelly interior of the mule, and her expression said very clearly that she had imagined rescue would look quite different from this. I pointed to the co-pilot's chair, which was the cleanest seat available. She sat down. I sat down across from her, and we looked at each other in the warm yellow light of the mule's interior. And she said something that sounded like a question, and I said, "I know. It is not much," and neither of us understood the other, and somehow that felt exactly right. I poured her a cup of water and set it on the console between us. She looked at it for a long time before she picked it up. Outside, the dead moon turned slowly under a sky full of stars that neither of us had grown up beneath. The beacon had gone dark. There was nothing left of her ship but metal and memory. And somehow, in the space of 45 minutes, my run of terrible luck had managed to get considerably more complicated. I started the engines. I had no idea where we were going yet, but I had a pulse to account for now, and that always changes the math. The first full day was mostly silence and mutual observation, which is a polite way of saying we spent about 18 hours staring at each other across the narrow interior of the mule and trying to figure out what the other person was going to do next. Her name, as near as I could tell, was Sarah Vathilan. She told me this by pointing at herself and speaking slowly the second morning, watching my mouth as I tried to repeat it, correcting me with small sounds when I got it wrong, which was every time for about an hour. The full name had tones and harmonics in it that my human throat could not produce without sounding like I was malfunctioning. So I called her Sarah. She found this offensive for about 12 hours. I could tell because every time I said it, the bioluminescence in her skin went a sharp, unhappy orange. Then, somewhere around the second evening, the orange stopped happening, and I decided to count that as acceptance. She would not eat my food. I put a ration pack in front of her, and she looked at it the way you look at something you suspect might be alive, then pushed it carefully to the side. I put out water, which she accepted. I put out a protein bar, which she examined, smelled, and sit down with an expression that suggested she had made her decision, and the answer was no. On day 2, I found her in the galley methodically going through every container in the supply cabinet, checking labels and smelling contents, and she eventually produced a bag of dried fruit and ate 3 pieces of it with the caution of someone diffusing something dangerous. I felt unreasonably proud of the dried fruit. The communication problem was real and it was large. My translation chip had given up entirely on her language after about 6 attempts. It was not a gap in the database. The technician at the relay station had told me once it was what happened when a language predated the database by several thousand years. The roots were there, buried in archaic conclave records, but the chip was designed for practical trade languages, not linguistic archaeology. So we improvised. She was smarter about it than I was. On the afternoon of the first day, she found a piece of hull plating I used as a writing surface and scratched a symbol onto it with a tool from her belt. Then she pointed at the symbol, then at herself, then at me, then made a questioning gesture. I understood. She was asking what my symbol was. My written name. I wrote Mac. She studied it for a long time, tracing the letters with one finger. Then she wrote her symbol next to it. 4 flowing lines that looked like a wave. She pointed at it, then at herself. Then she pointed at my letters, then at me. We went from there. By day 3, we had a small shared vocabulary. Not spoken, mostly written on the hull plating or gestured with our hands, but enough to exchange basic information. I knew she was not comfortable, not injured, not hungry, and very worried about something I could not identify yet. She knew I was not aggressive, was trying to reach a relay station, and had a debt problem, which I explained with a drawing of a large number of credits, with an arrow pointing at a menacing figure, which made her tilt her head at a very specific angle I was starting to recognize as confusion. On the morning of day 4, her translation implant activated. I did not know she had one. She had apparently been working on it since she woke up, running calibrations in the background while we communicated through drawings. And on the 4th morning she looked up from the co-pilot's chair and said, in accented but perfectly clear English, "Your emergency resuscitation technique Is that standard for your species? I nearly inhaled my coffee. CPR, I said when I had stopped coughing. Yes, pretty much everyone learns it. You compressed my thoracic cavity with your hands, she said. She did not sound angry. She sounded like she was filing information. Your heart stopped. That is how you restart it. That is how you restart it, she repeated carefully. By applying force to the chest. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Repeat until pulse returns. She was quiet for a moment. The light in her skin did something complicated, multiple colors at once, cycling through in a pattern I had not seen before. Among my people, she said, that action, pressing on another person's chest cavity with force, is the opening movement of a formal execution ceremony. I stared at her. When I first opened my eyes, she said, I believed I was being killed. I was saving you. I understand that now. The colors in her skin settled slowly into a steady, soft green. I thought about it for several days. Your face. The sounds you were making. I concluded that you were attempting to help, not harm. She paused. It took considerable reasoning. I sat back in my chair and thought about those first few seconds after she woke up, when she pushed herself against the back of the pod, and her skin went white-hot with light, and she screamed. I thought about what it would have looked like from her perspective. Waking up in a crashed ship to find an unknown creature looming over her, hands on her chest pressing down. I am sorry, I said. I did not know. You could not have known, she said. You acted to preserve my life using the only method available to you. That is not something that requires an apology. She said this very matter-of-factly, as though the logical conclusion was obvious. I found myself thinking that she was very good at separating the emotional reaction from the rational analysis of a situation. I filed that away. Who are you? I asked. I meant it generally. Species, origin, that kind of thing. I am Vethri, she said. My family is the sovereignty. My father is the High Sovereign of the Vethri Conclave territories. I sat with that for a moment. You are a princess, I said. The word does not translate precisely, but the function is similar, yes. And you were on that moon because my transport was attacked. For the first time, the steady green in her skin flickered towards something darker. 11 crew. They put me in the pod and initiated emergency separation before. She stopped. I was the only one in a pod. I am sorry, I said again. This time she did not say it required no apology. She looked away, at the starfield outside the viewport, and was quiet for a long time. Where are you taking me? She asked eventually. Relay Station 14. It is the nearest point with a conclave frequency broadcast. I thought you could contact your people from there. She looked at me. You have been heading for a conclave station the entire time. You needed to get home, I said. That seemed like the priority. The colors in her skin did something I had not seen yet. A slow, warm pulse of gold, spreading outward from her center like a sunrise. It lasted only a few seconds, then faded back to green. I did not ask what it meant. Some things you learn to read without needing a definition. She spent the rest of the day in the co-pilot's chair, working on her translation implant, improving the calibration, building vocabulary. I flew and maintained the engines and pretended not to watch her. She had, I was realizing, an engineer's mind, precise and curious, interested in how things worked rather than whether they were impressive. She spent 40 minutes examining the mule's navigation panel with an expression of deep professional concentration. This system is very old, she said. Yes, it is still functional, barely. You have modified it, she said. This was not a question, several times. Original parts are hard to find. She nodded slowly. I worked on ship systems before I was required to take up formal duties in my father's court. I prefer engineering to politics. She said this the way people say things they have said before, truths they have had to keep defending. I may be able to improve your navigation calibration, if you would permit it. I looked at her. You crashed into a moon 3 days ago and you want to fix my navigation system. It would give me something to do, she said simply. I pulled up the access panel and handed her a toolkit. She worked for 6 hours straight. I fell asleep in the pilot's chair and woke up to find the navigation system running smoother than it had in 4 years. The calibration error reduced by 60%. And Sarah sitting cross-legged in the galley, eating dried fruit and reading something on a small device she had retrieved from her belt. I looked at the navigation display for a long time. Thank you, I said. She looked up. You fixed my heart, she said. This is a smaller thing. I was not sure about that, but I let it stand. On day 5, she asked me about the debt. Not diplomatically. Not carefully. Directly, the way engineers ask about problems. You drew a large number with an arrow pointing at a threatening figure, she said. Is that a real danger to you? Vorith is not a patient creditor, I said. If I do not pay him, he will take the mule, and probably more. How much do you owe? 62,000 credits. She was quiet for a moment. I have access codes for a V3 family account that would cover that amount approximately 412 times over. I stared at her. I could transfer the funds, she said. It would take 40 minutes. I am not taking your money, I said. She tilted her head. Why not? It took me longer than it should have to find the answer to that. Because I did not help you because I wanted payment, I said finally. I helped you because you needed help. She looked at me with an expression I could not fully read. The light in her skin was still. No color, no pulse. Just the natural bioluminescence, slow and quiet among the conclave species, she said carefully. Assistance of significant scale is always preceded by a negotiation of exchange. Service for service, resource for resource. Nothing of value changes hands without prior agreement, she paused. You helped me without any agreement. Yes. You did not know who I was. No. You could not calculate what you might receive in return. I was not calculating anything, I said. You needed help. I was there. That is all. She was quiet for a long time. The light came back slowly, that same gold pulse I had seen the day before, warm and spreading. Among your species, she said. Is this normal? I thought about it honestly. Some people, I said, not all, but enough. She nodded once slowly, as though she was recording something important. That evening she fixed the secondary coolant coupling that had been leaking for 2 years. She did it without asking, while I was in the back running engine checks. And when I came forward and found it done, I just stood in the corridor and looked at it for a moment. You did not have to do that, I said. It was about to fail completely, she said. Another week and you would have lost engine 2. I know. Then why were you not fixing it? I did not have the right part. She held up a small, perfectly machined component that she had apparently fabricated from spare materials in the supply cabinet. This will hold for approximately 3 years, she said. After that, you will need a proper replacement. I took the component and looked at it. It was exact. Better than exact. It fit the coupling like it had been designed specifically for the mule's engine, which was impossible because the mule was 40 years old and built by a company that no longer existed. How did you know the dimensions? I asked. I measured them, she said. While you were sleeping. I did not know what to say to that. So I installed the part and went back to the pilot's chair and looked at the stars for a while, thinking about the strange specific arithmetic of this situation. An alien princess fixing my ship with parts she machined from scraps because the coupling was about to fail, and I had helped her without calculating the return, and somehow those two things felt related. On day 6, we reached Relay Station 14. A V3 response fleet was already there, 40 ships. I did not know they were V3 at first because I had never seen a V3 ship up close. But Sarah made a sound when she saw them on the scanner, a short, sharp sound that carried relief and grief and something else all at once. Your people, I said. My father's ships, she said. He was looking for me. Good, I said, and meant it. She looked at me. The light in her skin was doing something I had not seen before, a flickering uncertainty, like someone who cannot decide which way to walk. They will want to speak with you, she said. The man who found me. You will be questioned. That is fine. I have nothing to hide. They will treat you as, she paused, you are human. To the conclave. That means something specific, an expectation. They will not treat you poorly. But they will not treat you as an equal either. I shrugged. I have been treated worse. She looked at me for another moment. Then she said, Your name, Mac, is that shortened from something? Marcus. I said, Marcus Reyes. Mac is what people call me. Marcus, she said, trying the sound of it. I will tell them Marcus Reyes found me and brought me home. I will make certain they understand what that means. You do not have to do that. I know, she said. That is why I want to. The lead V3 ship hailed us. I answered it, and a voice came through my comms in a language my chip could not touch. And then Sarah leaned forward and said something in response that was clearly her name, and clearly also a statement of authority. And the voice on the other end changed tone immediately. I watched the fleet begin to maneuver around us, 40 ships of that same seamless, impossible construction, catching the light and throwing it back in colors that moved. And I thought about Voreth and his deadline and my debt and the cracked viewport on the mule. And then I thought about the woman sitting next to me who had fixed my engine coupling and eaten my dried fruit and told me that CPR looked like an execution ceremony. I thought, well, this is not how I expected this week to go. She turned and looked at me just before the docking connection sealed. Thank you, Marcus Reyes, she said. Not formally, just directly. The way she said everything, clear and without decoration. Any time, I said, which turned out, as it happened, to be a much more binding statement than I intended. The first V3 vessel I boarded from the inside was the kind of experience that makes you feel very specifically human. Not in a bad way, not exactly. more the way you feel when you walk into a building that was designed for purposes you do not fully understand, where all the proportions are slightly different from what you expect, where the light comes from places you cannot locate, where the floors feel too smooth and the ceilings are too high, and every surface seems to breathe. Not hostile, just deeply, fundamentally not made for you. I followed Sarah through a docking corridor that curved upward in a gentle arc, and two Vaythri guards fell in behind us without a word. They were tall, both of them, taller than Sarah, and their skin pulsed steady blue, the color of authority I was learning. They did not touch me. They did not have to. Their presence behind me was clear enough. The ship's interior reminded me of the crashed vessel in the crater, the same seamless surfaces, the same sourceless light, but larger, more complex, with chambers and corridors branching off in directions that seemed to suggest a geometry I could not quite follow. We passed several other Vaythri. They all looked at me. Some of them looked at me the way people look at something interesting. Others looked at me the way people look at something they are not sure is safe. Sarah did not explain me. She did not slow down or stop to introduce me. She moved through her father's flagship like she owned it, which she somewhat did, and I stayed close and tried not to touch anything. We reached a large circular chamber with a high dome overhead, and a floor that was a single, continuous piece of something that looked like dark glass. Standing in the center of the chamber were four Vaythri, all in formal attire, all with the slow, controlled bioluminescence of people who were working very hard not to show what they were feeling. The tallest one, a man with silver-gray bioluminescence and Sarah's same high cheekbones, looked at his daughter for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at me. I had been looked at by important people before. Generals, senators, a galactic commerce commissioner once, outside a relay station on the far rim. None of them had this particular quality of attention, which was not hostile and not warm, but total, like being the only object in the room. Sarah spoke for several minutes. I could not follow any of it, but I could follow the shape of the conversation, the way you can follow music without knowing the words. She was explaining. She was defending. She was stating, not asking. Her father listened without interrupting, which I suspected was not his usual mode. At the end, he looked at me again. "You are Marcus Reyes," he said. His translationship was better than mine. His English was nearly perfect. "Yes, sir," I said. "You found my daughter's vessel." "Yes." "You entered it without authorization." The beacon was active. In human salvage law, an active distress beacon authorizes intervention regardless of vessel registration. "This is not human space." "No," I said. "But I brought her home." He was quiet for a moment. The silver light in his skin was absolutely still. "My daughter tells me you performed a resuscitation procedure on her." Her heart stopped. I restarted it. "With your hands." "Yes." Another pause. "She also tells me that you did not ask for anything in return, that you refused the offer of financial compensation." "That is correct." He looked at me for a long time with that total complete attention, and I could see him trying to locate me within a framework he had built over decades of dealing with every kind of person the galaxy produced, and finding that I did not fit neatly into any of his categories. "Why?" he said. I had been expecting a longer question. Something about humanity or salvagers or galactic law, not that single short word. "She was in trouble," I said. "I was there. That is why." He said something in Vaythri that I could not follow. One of the four advisors behind him made a sound that might have been agreement or disagreement or neither. Sarah's bioluminescence did the gold pulse thing again, quick and warm. "You will remain on board while we return to Vaythri space," her father said. "You will be treated as a guest. You will not go anywhere on this vessel unescorted. Is this acceptable?" "Yes, sir." "Good." He looked at Sarah. He said something short in Vaythri. Her skin responded with a color I had not seen before, a deep, complex amber, and she said something back that sounded like a full sentence. He made a gesture that I was almost certain was dismissal. We left the chamber. "What did he say to you at the end?" I asked her in the corridor. "He said that you were strange," she said. "And what did you say?" I said that I was aware of that. She walked in silence for a moment. "He also said that he owed you a debt. In our culture, that is a significant statement from the sovereign." "I did not do it for a debt," I said. "I know." "That is what he finds strange." She paused. "What he finds interesting, I think. He does not often encounter things he cannot predict." She showed me to a guest chamber that was larger than the entire interior of the mule, and contained, among other things, a sleeping surface, a bathing facility, and a window that looked out on open space. I stood at the window for a long time after she left, watching the stars move as the fleet turned toward Vaythri's space base. The next 3 days were strange in a way that was different from the strangeness of being alone with Sarah on the mule. That had been the strangeness of two people in a small space trying to understand each other. This was the strangeness of being the only human in a world where human was not nothing, but was also not very much. The V3 fleet staff were polite. They answered my questions, escorted me where I wanted to go, provided food that was mostly edible, and watched me with a specific kind of careful attention. You give something that you have been told is harmless, but that you are not entirely. Sarah came to find me on the second day. She brought a xenologist, a young V3 woman with quick eyes and a device for recording everything, and she introduced her as an official researcher assigned to document my presence for conclave records. Her name was Vale, and she had been studying humans at a distance for 2 years and had never actually been in a room with one before. She looked at me the way I had looked at the crashed ship on the moon, like something that defied the catalog. "May I ask you questions?" she said. Her English was careful and precise. "Go ahead," I said. She asked me about Earth, about human history, our biology, our social structures, our technology level. I answered everything. When she asked about our wars, I did not soften it. I gave her the real version, the long version, the version that included the parts humans preferred not to think about too hard. I told her about the weapons we had built that could erase cities. I told her about the things we had done to each other and to the planet we lived on. I watched her expression change as I talked. "And your species survived this," she said. It was not quite a question. "We are still here," I said. "How?" That was the question I had been waiting for. And I had been thinking about how to answer it since before she asked it, because it was the question I had asked myself 1,000 times. Lying in field hospitals and disaster sites and cramped salvager bunks at the edge of nowhere. "I do not know exactly," I said. "I think it is because we do not accept limits. Not really. We build limits, rules, agreements, systems, all of that. But when those systems fail, when everything collapses, something in us does not recognize the end. We just start again." Vale wrote something down. "Is this an individual trait or a species trait?" "Both," I said. "It starts with individuals. One person who refuses to stop, and then more people follow that person, and then it becomes a cultural habit, and after enough generations, it is just what humans are." "That is remarkable," she said. She said it the way scientists say things when they mean, "I am going to think about this for a very long time." On the third day, we reached V3 space, and I understood for the first time what the phrase truly meant. I had been in conclave space before. I had visited ring stations and trade hubs and relay platforms. I thought I had a reasonable sense of what civilizations that had been spacefaring for thousands of years looked like. I was wrong, and I understood that I was wrong the moment we dropped out of transit drive and I saw the V3 home system for the first time. There was a ring station the size of a small moon, orbiting a gas giant, with what looked like a permanent atmospheric structure running along its outer equator. There were ships everywhere, hundreds of them, shapes I had no names for, all that same flowing construction, all pulsing with slow-colored light that I now knew was not decoration but communication, the ships talking to each other in a language of bioluminescent signals. There was a planet below the station, green and blue and wrapped in weather, with 3 natural moons and at least 2 artificial ones. And there were structures on those moons, visible even from this distance, enormous and delicate and clearly very old. I sat at the window of my guest chamber and looked at all of it and felt very specifically small. Not in a crushing way, more in the way that makes you recalibrate, makes you take stock. I was 34 years old, born on a planet that had been in space for 60 years, and I was looking at a civilization that had been in space for approximately 8,000 years, and the gap between those two numbers was not just big, it was profound. It was the kind of number that rewrites your sense of scale. Sarah found me at the window. She stood beside me and looked out at her home system with an expression I could read clearly now. Relief and grief and love, and something like the feeling of returning to a place you thought you had lost. "It is beautiful," I said. "Yes," she said. "I did not fully understand until now how old your civilization is, how much you have built. Does it bother you?" I thought about it. "No," I said honestly. "It is just a real thing. Humans are new, you are not. That is how things are." "Some humans find it troubling," she said. "The ones who have visited conclave space before. There is a word for it, the feeling of encountering a civilization so much older than your own." "What is the word?" "It does not translate directly. It means something like the humility of the young." "I can live with that," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "My father has called a formal reception to celebrate my return. You are expected to attend. This is an honor. It means he is including you in a formal acknowledgement of debt. I will be the only human there." "Yes. I should probably tell you that I have one set of clean clothes and they are not formal." She looked at me with an expression that I had learned to read as amusement in a register too quiet for ordinary observation. "I will have something appropriate provided," she said. "You do not have to, Marcus," she said. And it was the first time she had used my name without it being part of a longer sentence. Just my name, stated cleanly. "You are going to stop telling me I do not have to do things. I am aware that I do not have to. That is not relevant." I looked at her for a moment. The light in her skin was warm amber and steady. "All right," I said. The formal reception was held in a chamber that made the flagship's docking. Hall looked small. Hundreds of Vathri attended. There were also representatives from 6 other conclave species, tall and small and scaled and feathered and things I had no category for, all in formal attire, all gathered in a room that seemed simultaneously the most beautiful and the most intimidating place I had ever stood. I wore Vathri formal clothes that Sarah had arranged, dark fabric that moved like water, cut for a human body by someone who had apparently studied human proportions very carefully in the preceding 4 hours. It fit perfectly. I was still recognizably human, which meant I was still recognizably the smallest person in the room, but I looked like I belonged, which was the important thing. Sarah stood beside me for most of the evening. She introduced me to people with her hand lightly on my arm, a gesture of social protection that I understood even without a translation chip. She spoke for me when the language was too fast for my implant. She clarified when I was misunderstood, and she navigated me through a social landscape that operated on rules so different from anything I knew that I would have been completely lost without her. Several people asked her, in my presence and clearly expecting me not to understand, what it was like to be rescued by a human. She always answered the same way. I caught the word she repeated each time. A Vathri word my chip eventually matched to a root meaning. The one who acts without calculation. It sounded, in her language, like a title. Her father gave a formal speech of which I understood about half, and at the end he looked directly at me and said something that made the entire room go very quiet. Sarah translated it quietly into my ear. "He says that the sovereignty recognizes Marcus Reyes of Earth as a friend of the Vathri family. He says that this recognition carries with it full hospitality rights, travel protections in all Vathri space, and a formal letter of safe passage in the High Sovereign's name." I looked at the High Sovereign across the room. He looked back at me with that same total, measuring attention. I inclined my head, he inclined his. The room exhaled. Afterward, when the reception wound down and the guests moved to other chambers, and the formal obligations of the evening were done, Sarah found me at a window overlooking the home planet. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking that yesterday I was worried about a debt I could not pay," I said. "And today I am standing in a room where a sovereign government just gave me a letter of safe passage." "Your debt to Vorith," she said. "It is settled. My father's office transferred the funds this afternoon." I turned to look at her. I said I did not want to be paid. "You were not paid. The sovereignty does not pay debts of honor. We settle obligations, there is a difference." She met my eyes evenly. "The man you owed money to was threatening your safety. My father considers your safety a matter of sovereign concern now. He acted accordingly." "That is a very fine distinction," I said. "Yes," she said, and the expression that was too quiet to be ordinary amusement appeared again. "It is." I looked back at the planet below. Somewhere out there was the mule, docked in the station bay, probably the most out-of-place vessel in 100 light-years in any direction. And somewhere farther out was the dead moon with the crashed crescent ship in the crater, still sitting there, a hull full of memory. "What happens next?" I asked. "For you?" "For both of us." She was quiet for a moment. "For me, I resume my duties. There are consequences to my kidnapping that require political attention. My father needs allies and the attack on my transport requires an official response." She paused. "For you, I imagine you return to salvaging. If that is what you want. Is that what you think I should do?" She turned to look at me. In the soft light of the reception hall, her bioluminescence was a color I had not seen before on her. A deep, quiet blue that was not the formal blue of authority but something slower and more personal. "I think," she said carefully, "that you are someone who is very difficult to put back in a category once you have stepped outside of." I was not entirely sure what that meant, but it felt like something important. "I will be in this system for at least 3 weeks," she said, "before the political situation requires travel. If you wish to remain as a guest of the sovereignty during that time, my father has extended that invitation." I thought about the mule in the station bay, freshly refueled and debt-free and sitting there waiting. I thought about the outer expanse and the salvage runs and the long hours of silence. Then I looked at Sarah with her quiet deep blue light and her engineering mind, and her ability to manufacture a coolant coupling from spare parts. and I thought there will always be salvage runs. 3 weeks, I said. I can do 3 weeks. The light in her skin did the warm amber again. Slow and steady, and I was beginning to understand that amber meant something it took me 2 more days to find the right word for. It meant, good. Nobody had told me about the Keth. That was my fault partly. I had been so occupied with the strangeness of A3 space, the beauty of it, the sheer scale, that I had not paid much attention to the strategic situation. Sarah had mentioned that her transport was attacked. I had assumed, the way you assume things when you are overwhelmed by other information, that the attack was an isolated incident, a criminal action, something small. It was not small. On my 9th day in V3 space, I was in the station's observation deck, which was a glass-floored platform overlooking the gas giant below, when a V3 officer found me and told me, politely but urgently, that my presence was requested in the tactical chamber. Not as a guest this time, as someone who might have something useful to say. The tactical chamber was deep in the station's core, and it was the first place I had been in V3 space that looked functional rather than beautiful. Screens covered 3 walls displaying star maps and fleet positions and data streams I could not read but could interpret by shape. There were 15 V3 officers present, and Sarah and her father and 2 advisors I had not met before. And on the central display was a pattern of fleet movements that I recognized. I recognized it the way you recognize a face you have not seen in years. Not consciously, not immediately, but with a cold prickling certainty that starts in your stomach before it reaches your brain. I stood at the back of the chamber and looked at the pattern and felt the certainty grow. The High Sovereign was speaking. Sarah was translating for me, quietly, standing close enough that I could hear her without disrupting the briefing. The Keth Dominion, she said, had been pushing against Conclave border territories for 40 years. Small incursions, withdrawn before formal protest was viable. A pattern of testing. 2 months ago the pattern changed. Larger forces, deeper incursions. The attack on her transport was not a criminal action. It was a targeted military operation to remove her from the diplomatic equation before a formal conflict began. The Conclave had responded 3 times with precise, coordinated counterattacks. All 3 times the Keth absorbed the strikes and pushed harder. We cannot understand their strategy, the lead tactical officer was saying, and Sarah murmured the translation. They accept losses that no rational calculus supports. They give up positions of value to advance positions of lower strategic worth. They behave as though the outcome of individual engagements is irrelevant. I was still looking at the display. It is not irrelevant to them, I said. The room went quiet. I had not meant to speak out loud, but the words were out, and 15 V3 officers and a sovereign were looking at me, and there was nothing to do but continue. May I asked, gesturing at the display. The High Sovereign looked at his tactical officer. The officer nodded, barely, the V3 equivalent of a shrug. The High Sovereign made a gesture of permission. I walked to the display and looked at the fleet positions for a moment. Then I started pointing. This position here, which they gave up last month. It looks like a loss. A valuable orbital platform surrendered under pressure. Why would they do that? I tapped the screen, because taking it cost you resources. Ships, personnel, time. They gave you the platform. You spent to take it. They moved here instead, to this position which is worth less on its own, but which puts them in range of this supply corridor. I pointed to a chain of positions moving across the display. They are not trying to win engagements. They are trying to wear you down. Every time you win a battle, you spend something, ships, resources, crew, time. They are accepting battlefield losses to impose strategic costs. They will keep doing this until either they have exhausted you, or you change how you are fighting. The room was very quiet. We know this pattern, I said. On Earth we called it attrition warfare. It is very old, it is very ugly, and it is very difficult to stop once it starts, because the only effective counter is to play the same game, which means accepting that you are going to lose a great deal before you start winning. I stopped talking. 15 V3 officers were looking at me with expressions ranging from skeptical to deeply unsettled. The High Sovereign said something. Sarah translated. He asks how you know this. Because humans invented it, I said, independently. We used it on each other for centuries. I know what it looks like because I grew up on a planet where every military academy teaches the history of another silence. Then the tactical officer said something, and Sarah translated. He says the pattern is familiar to them now that it is named. He says they did not have a name for it before. Now you do, I said. The name is the least important part. The important part is changing how you respond. The High Sovereign looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something to Sarah directly. She turned to me. Her expression was careful and controlled, but I could see something working underneath it. He wants to know, she said quietly, if your government would be willing to provide military advisors. I had known the question was coming. I had known it since I walked to that display and opened my mouth, and I had been dreading it. That is not my decision, I said. That would require a formal diplomatic request to Earth, and Earth would need to understand fully what they are being asked to do before they agreed. My father would make a formal request, Sarah said, with your endorsement. I looked at the display. I looked at the pattern of Keth fleet movements, creeping toward conclave territory one calculated loss at a time. I thought about what happened the last someone applied this strategy on Earth, and the time before that, and the time before that. All the long, ugly grinding chapters. I thought about sitting in the co-pilot's chair fixing my navigation system, eating dried fruit with the caution of someone diffusing something, looking at my drawings and building a shared vocabulary from nothing. I thought about what I had told Vale the xenologist, about humans not accepting limits, about the cultural habit of starting again. I thought, if I endorse this, I am not sending advisors, I am sending a doctrine, a way of thinking about war that the conclave has never encountered. And you cannot teach that and then untaught it. You cannot show people how humans think about survival and then put it back in the box. After that conversation, I found Sarah alone in one of the station's engineering sections, which was where she went when she needed to think. She was examining a faulty atmospheric regulator with the focused private expression of someone who is using a technical problem to manage a larger one. I told her what I was thinking. All of it, including the parts about the doctrine and the box. She listened without interrupting, which was something I had come to recognize as how she listened to things she considered important. You are right, she said, when I finished. The conclave does not fully understand what it is asking for. And you? She set down the regulator. She looked at me with that clear, direct attention that she brought to things she was about to say, honestly. I understand it better than my father does, she said. I have spent 2 weeks with you. I have watched how you think, how you solve problems, how you respond when the expected solution does not work. You improvise, you exceed your own parameters, you refuse the answer that says, stops. That is remarkable. It is also, from a certain perspective, something that should be approached carefully. Yes, I said. But carefully is not the same as not at all, she said. The Keth are not being careful. They are using a strategy that, if left to run, will erode the conclave over decades. My father's people will not understand what is happening to them until it is too late. She met my eyes. Your people understand it. That is not an accident. That is experience. It is not the kind of experience anyone should be proud of, I said. No, she agreed. But it is the kind that matters right now. I was quiet for a moment. If I send this message to Earth, if they send advisors, it changes things permanently. Yes, your people will never look at humanity the same way again. No, she said, they will not. Is that good? She looked at me for a long time. The light in her skin was the deep, steady blue I had come to associate with something more personal than authority, the color she used when she was speaking precisely and meant every word. It is real, she said. Whether it is good depends on what your people choose to do with the door. I thought about that for a long time after she left. Then I went back to my guest chamber and opened a direct comm channel to Earth. I had not used it since I arrived. It felt significant to use it now. I wrote a message to the Earth Diplomatic Corps. I kept it short, because the important things usually are short. I told them what was happening. I told them what was being asked. I told them that the door was open, and that what came through it would matter a great deal to a very large number of people. Then I added one line at the bottom, because it was true and because I thought it needed to be said. I wrote, they do not know what they are asking for. Make sure we do. I sent it and sat back and looked at the stars through the viewport, and somewhere far below, the gas giant turned in its vast, slow orbit, indifferent to all of it. 3 days later, Earth responded. The Diplomatic Corps was convening an emergency session. They wanted more information. They wanted my direct testimony. They wanted a formal briefing from the V3 sovereignty. They also wanted to know who I was, because apparently a salvager making first contact on behalf of humanity was not what anyone had expected this week either. I wrote back, my name is Marcus Reyes. I am a salvager. I found the princess. Everything after that is complicated. I thought that covered it reasonably well. 2 years later, I was sitting on the hull of the Mule on a landing pad outside the V3 station's primary dock, watching a sunset happen over the gas giant's upper cloud layer, which was not technically a sunset because there was no star at the right angle, but the light effects were similar enough that my brain called it that anyway. The sky was doing something spectacular in shades of orange and deep violet, and I had a cup of coffee that was too cold, and I was trying to remember exactly when everything had become this, meaning the end of the Keth conflict. The new designation for humanity in Conclave records, Voreth's debt, long paid, a memory so old it had lost its emotional weight. The mule, still flying, somewhat improbably, with a second navigation upgrade that Sarah had installed 3 months ago when she had 40 minutes free and could not help herself. The Keth conflict ended not with a battle but with a negotiated exhaustion, which was the exact kind of outcome the Conclave had no framework for before. Humans showed up with the concept of a peace that no one wins but that everyone survives. I had been in the room for the final negotiation session. 3 days. Bad coffee, worse food, translators going hoarse. I had explained the concept of a ceasefire 14 times to 14 different conclave representatives, who kept asking why both sides would agree to stop when neither side had achieved their objective. Because the objective changes, I said each time. The objective stops being victory and becomes not losing more. Both sides can agree to that. They have to, eventually. Eventually, they did. The conclave designation changed 2 weeks after the ceasefire. The formal documentation was 17 pages long and in 3 languages, and the important part was 3 words: founding contributor status. It meant that humans were no longer the new species tolerated at the edge of conclave space. It meant we had, in the specific and permanent way that political designations indicate, become part of something. Not everyone was happy about it. There were factions in the conclave who thought that humanity's particular brand of strategic thinking was a contamination, not a contribution, that we had introduced a way of reasoning about conflict that could not be unlearned, that the galaxy would be permanently less stable with humans in it as equals rather than curiosities. They were not entirely wrong. I had said as much in my formal testimony to the Conclave Council, which was not what most human diplomats thought I should say, but which I felt was the honest answer. Humans are destabilizing, I said. We have always been destabilizing. We destabilize the situations we are in because we do not accept the situation as fixed. That is not the same as being dangerous. It is the same as being present. I was told that was a very unusual diplomatic statement. I said I was a salvager, not a diplomat. The council recorded it anyway. The mule's hatch opened and Sarah sat down beside me on the hull. She had a cup of something warm in both hands, and she folded her legs and looked at the gas giant light show, with the expression she used for things she considered beautiful, and did not need to say so. We sat in silence for a while. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that takes time to build between 2 people and that you do not notice, building until one day it is just there, fully formed. The council session finished early, I said. It went better than expected. The border treaty language held. She sipped from her cup. Vale released her research paper today. The one about humans? The 3rd one, she said. She is writing more papers about humans than any xenologist in conclave history. My father says she has become obsessed. Her first paper was 30 pages and classified, I said. What is the 3rd one? 240 pages. Also classified. The summary is available. She was quiet for a moment. The summary says they are not what we expected. They are something we do not have an existing category for. They are, depending on the circumstances, the most frightening and the most reassuring species in the conclave. I looked at the light in the sky, those improbable violets and oranges. Is that a compliment? I asked. From Vale, Sarah said. It is the highest possible one. I finished my cold coffee and set the cup down. I turned down the diplomatic corps offer this morning, I said. She did not look surprised. The desk position. Yes. The stable salary. The formal title. The office with a view of the station exterior, all of that. She was quiet for a moment. Why? I thought about how to answer that. I had been thinking about it since the morning, and I still was not sure the answer was fully formed. But some answers do not wait for you to finish forming them. Because the thing I am is not a diplomat, I said. The thing I am is someone who flies toward distress beacons. Someone who cuts into ships that should not open and pulls out people who are not breathing. I do not know how to do that from an office. You could learn, she said. I know, I said. That is the problem. If I stay here and take the office, I will learn how to do exactly that. I will become exactly that. And something else will stop. I looked at the sky. Something that was useful, I think. The part of me that does not calculate. She turned to look at me. In the strange orange light of the gas giant atmosphere, her bioluminescence was invisible. The light from outside too bright to distinguish from the light within her. She looked for a moment, like anyone. Like a person sitting on the outside of a ship at the edge of something vast, thinking about what came next. Vale asked me something in her interview last month, Sarah said. She asked me if I thought humans were, at a fundamental level, driven by courage or by stubbornness. What did you tell her? I told her I was not sure there was a difference. She looked back at the sky. I still think about that. I thought about it too. Courage, stubbornness. The distance between them seemed to collapse the more you examined it. You do the thing that needs doing. You keep doing it. You do not stop when the numbers say stop. Whether that is brave or simply obstinate depends on whether it works. The formal position is still open, Sarah said. If you change your mind. I know, my father would be pleased. I know that too. I would not be displeased, she said very quietly, which was a different thing from what she had said before, and she knew it, and I knew it, and we both let it sit there in the orange light without pushing on it. I looked at the mule, my ship, scraped and patched and older than it had any right to be, sitting on the pad with the running lights blinking amber in the growing dark. I had gotten the viewport crack fixed 6 months ago. That had felt like a milestone of some kind, the first major repair I had done not because I had to but because I wanted to, because the ship deserved it. I stood up and offered Sarah a hand which she took, which she no longer looked at with the specific wariness she had used to look at human gestures with. She stood up beside me, and for a moment we were standing very close together on the hull of the mule with the gas giant, doing impossible things with light behind us. And neither of us moved. I am going to go, I said. Back out. There will be another beacon somewhere. I know, she said. There are still sectors no one has surveyed. The outer expanse has changed since the war. There will be things worth finding. There always are, she said. I will have the shipcom frequency active, I said. Same as it has been. Then I will use it, she said. Same as I have been. I looked at her for one more moment in that light. Her bioluminescence was back now, visible again as the outside light faded. That quiet, steady amber that I had spent 2 years learning to read, and that I understood now as precisely as I understood my own name. I went down the ramp and into the mule and sealed the hatch and powered up the engines. The old cough was still there when I hit 60% thrust. Not as bad as it used to be, but there, a reminder of what the ship was and where it had been and how it had gotten from there to here. I lifted off the pad and cleared the station and set a heading for the outer expanse. There was a salvage reading 2 days out. Possibly a derelict relay platform from before the war, possibly something no one had seen in it. I had no idea which. That was the thing about salvage runs. You did not know what you were going to find until you found it. You just aimed at the signal and flew. In the Conclave archives, I was later told, there was a file on humanity that had been growing since Vale published her first paper. It was classified at the highest level and had never been released in full. The summary line had been updated twice since I arrived in Conclave space. The first update, after my testimony to the Conclave Council, read, unpredictable but functional, advise monitored integration. The second update, after the ceasefire and the founding contributor designation, had been written by Vale herself, and Sarah had gotten a copy and given it to me on a small card that she said I should keep somewhere I would see it. I had taped it to the dashboard, just below the viewport, so I could read it every time I sat down to fly. It read, they do not calculate survival. They simply survive, and somehow, improbably, magnificently, so does everything they touch. I looked at it for a moment in the light of the mule's interior, that warm yellow light that I had looked at for years and that felt still like home. Then I pointed the nose of my ship at the outer expanse and pushed the engines past 60%, and the old cough came and went, and the stars opened up ahead of me in every direction, and somewhere out there a signal was waiting for someone to fly toward it, without calculating the return. I was, as it turned out, very good at that, and for the first time in a long time, being very good at that felt like exactly enough.